For decades, Pastor Robert Morris sold himself as God's favorite CEO. He built a spiritual empire with all the branding of a Fortune 500 company as he convinced the faithful that their sacrificial giving was an investment in the afterlife. Their tithes also kept his designer suits pressed, his mansions pristine, and his travel first class. He and his wife even own 3 mansions at the same time. That's because the MO of the Megachurch Golden Boy is nearly always the same. Pretend to be humble, but constantly share how you overcame any and all struggles through your God. Tell your church members that you love them so they'll make you a rich man, and threaten them with God's wrath if they don't. And behind the scenes, hide every bit of evidence from the trail of victims being left in your wake. And always make sure the wives fall in line. Greed, lust, and ego are the name of the game, and Robert Morris was no exception. In fact, his victim was only 12 years old, and by the time she was a grown woman with a family of her own, she had had enough of seeing Robert gain fame and wealth while she was left to deal with the aftermath. When she decided to come forward, all hell would break loose, and the empire that Robert and his henchmen built would come crashing down around them. This is the scandalous rise and fall of Pastor Robert Morris and Gateway Church. Before we begin, please allow for a quick word from the sponsor of this video, Proton Mail. Did you know that Gmail and other email providers scan our emails so they can target us with ads? It's scary to think that our emails aren't truly private, but with Proton Mail, they can be. With Proton Mail, your emails are yours and yours alone. With end-to-end encryption and zero-access technology, no one can read your email. No ads, no trackers, and no spying by big tech. Just privacy. One of the things that I love most is that it's free to sign up with Proton Mail. Stay effortlessly organized with auto-sorted folders, one-click unsubscribes, and spam that actually stays gone. Switching is simple. You can import everything from your current email or start fresh with a clean slate. Proton Mail even provides you with unlimited email aliases so you can protect your main inbox and keep your identity safe. It's part of the Proton ecosystem, including Drive, VPN, Docs, and Pass, all built to help you de-Google your life. Sign up today for free at proton.me/notthegoodgirl. What's even better is that if you want extra anonymity, you can connect through Tor for another layer of privacy. And with Newsletter View, you can see all your subscriptions in one place and unsubscribe from the noise. Sign up with Proton Mail today by clicking the link below in the description box or by going to proton.me/notthegoodgirl. Remember, it's free to sign up with Proton Mail. Thank you, Proton Mail, for sponsoring this video. Robert Preston Morris was born on July 29th of 1961 in Marshall, Texas, as the youngest child in a devout Baptist family that attended church 3 times every week. Religion was at the heart of this family, but as Robert grew into adulthood, he made no mention of any desire to work in the church, but he still managed to play the part of a godly man extremely well. So well, in fact, that it provided the perfect cover for the double life he was leading, even as a teenager. According to his own testimony years later, Robert was selling drugs from the back of his car in the church parking lot before and after Sunday service. Then he would walk into church, praise his God, and say all the right things. No one seemed to suspect the hidden activities lurking behind his faithful image. This pattern of deception would become a defining theme throughout his life. After graduating high school, Robert enrolled at East Texas Baptist College in Marshall to begin theological studies. He later attended the Criswell Center for Biblical Studies in Dallas, which is now known as Criswell College. The institution claims to be committed to training pastors and ministry leaders in strict biblical theology. On May 2nd of 1980, when Robert was just 18 years old, he married a young woman named Debbie. Years later, Robert would claim that his God had personally commanded him to marry her. The image of the young, charismatic preacher with a new wife and a calling from his God deepened the trust people placed in him, which made it even easier to hide the other life he didn't want them to see. Robert had moved on from drugs, but he hadn't moved on from living a double life. He had simply traded one kind of wrongdoing for another, and this one was far more calculated and manipulative. By the time Debbie walked down the aisle, Robert was working as a traveling evangelist for the Highway 80 rescue mission in Longview, Texas. While he was sharing the good word on the road, he would often stay with local church families who opened their homes to him. It was a common arrangement in small-town ministry circles, one which was built on trust and the belief that a man of God would be a safe and honorable guest. Less than a year after marrying Debbie, Robert was invited to stay in the home of Susan and Jerry Clemishire in Hominy, Oklahoma. Their daughter, Cindy Clemishire, was 11 years old when she first met the young pastor. He was 20, full of energy, and had already established himself as one to watch in the evangelical circuit. Her parents were deeply involved in their church, and they asked him to lead a youth revival at their congregation. The event drew a large crowd, and from then on, Robert became a familiar face in their congregation. In the meantime, Robert and Debbie welcomed their first son, Josh, to the family. Robert sometimes traveled with his wife and son in tow, and other times he visited alone. No matter if he was by himself or had his family with him, he always stayed with Cindy and her family whenever he was in town. The two families grew close enough to plan vacations together. Some trips were for leisure, others to visit churches and spread the good word together. By Christmas of 1982, that closeness was at its peak. Cindy's parents invited Robert to spend the holiday with them as he would be on the road at the time. By then, Robert had begun to make a name for himself in the wider evangelical world. In an April 1982 newspaper article, Robert claimed that in the 2 years he'd been working on the road, he had traveled over 100,000 miles, spoken to 500,000 people, and witnessed more than 10,000 conversions to Christianity. He had also been invited to join the James Robison Evangelistic Association. In the early 1980s, the association was one of the most prominent evangelical ministries in the U.S. It was led by televangelist James Robison, who hosted large revival meetings with a string of nationally broadcast programs, all of which drew massive audiences for the time. Being invited to join the association was a significant career milestone. It meant stepping onto a national platform with the endorsement of a highly respected figure in the evangelical world. It also gave Robert opportunities to speak at major crusades, conferences, and churches across the country, which were far beyond the range of his fledgling traveling ministry. Basically, it was the Christian boys' club you wanted to be a part of if you wanted to make it big. As every pastor likes to turn their test into a testimony, part of Robert's appeal was his personal story. He openly shared that selling drugs and living in an ungodly way were just expressions of his search for happiness. He also confessed that he had only converted to Christianity in February of 1981, which was long after he had been preaching on the road. The dramatic turnaround from drug dealer to God's chosen one made it hard for people not to be drawn in. People who heard him preach often remarked that he spoke with wisdom far beyond his years, but there was something Robert was even better at than connecting with his flock. He'd become a pro at living a double life. And while he had turned away from drugs, there was something far darker he wasn't about to let go of. When Robert stayed with Cindy's family in Christmas of 1982, she was 12 years old. On Christmas Eve, Cindy sat in the back seat of the car with Robert while her parents drove them to church. He whispered to her that after dark she should come and visit him in his room. She thought nothing of it. He was a trusted family friend, and she was a child. After the lights went out in the room she shared with her sister, Cindy walked down the hallway and into the room Robert always stayed in. Years later, she could still recall in explicit detail exactly what she was wearing that night. Pink pajamas with bloomer pants, underwear underneath, and a snap-up robe. When Cindy entered Robert's room that night, he told her to lie on the bed on her back with her eyes closed. Then he essayed her. Before he allowed Cindy to leave, he said, quote, "Never tell anyone about this because it will ruin everything," end quote. For the next 4.5 years, Robert made time to essay Cindy as often as he could. The friendship between the families had deepened, and the Clemishires often traveled to Texas to visit Robert and Debbie. They stayed in their home, shared meals together, and attended church events as one big happy family. Cindy's parents believed these trips were about fellowship and ministry, and Jerry even donated money to support Robert's ministry. But Robert had other motives that centered on keeping Cindy tightly under his control. By day, Robert continued to spread the word. He played the role of a godly pastor, husband, and father, but whenever he could, he would make excuses to visit Cindy and get her on her own. When she reached her teenage years, Robert became more aggressive with his SA. He would make excuses to come to her house and take her for drives in his car, where he SA'd her. By then, he had given up the traveling evangelist role and moved near Fort Worth, Texas, in favor of being a pastor at the Shady Grove Church, a name that fit him well. While Cindy dealt privately with shame and the inner turmoil years of abuse had caused, Robert seemed to have no qualms about his double life. His ministry was going from strength to strength. In the early years of their marriage, Robert and Debbie poured themselves into church life as opportunities arose, whether that was serving in various volunteer and/or staff positions. Robert's gift for public speaking and Debbie's warm presence made them a sought-after couple in ministry circles. But both Robert and Debbie were projecting a facade of being kind and caring people. But in 1987, his path to pulpit popularity came to a grinding halt. Cindy was 17 years old, and during a discussion with a friend about an unrelated non-consensual situation the friend had been through, she asked Cindy, "Has anyone else ever done this to you?" Cindy replied that she couldn't say anything because she had made a promise to never speak about what had been going on. But with the encouragement and support of her friend, she finally said the name of the person who had, by then, SA'd her more than 100 times. The two girls immediately spoke to Jerry and Susan about what Robert had been doing to Cindy since she was 12 years old, and they believed their daughter. Unfortunately, instead of going to the police, Jerry rang the head pastor at Shady Grove to demand that Robert resign immediately or he would report the abuse to the sheriff. According to reports, the head pastor at the church gave Robert the opportunity to stand down from ministry, but for only 2 years. He wasn't fired, and there was no investigation into Cindy's allegations. Not long after sharing her experience, Cindy received a call from Robert's wife, Debbie. Debbie told Cindy that she forgave her. She didn't say for what, but it was clear that Robert had blamed 12-year-old Cindy for seducing him. In the week of the revelations, the friendship between the two families collapsed. There were no more shared holidays or vacations and no more visits to Texas. Cindy was left to pick up the pieces of her life, while Robert and Debbie simply moved on. Over the next 2 years, Robert worked as a security guard and used car salesman. As if like clockwork, 2 years after Jerry made that phone call to the lead pastor at Shady Grove, Robert was back behind the pulpit. He still had James Robinson's endorsement, and he was made associate pastor. Throughout the 90s, he worked at Shady Grove and went back to being a traveling minister some of the time. But by April of 2000, Robert no longer wanted to share the spotlight. On Easter weekend, Robert and Debbie hosted the first service for their very own Gateway Church. The initial congregation met in a rented space in Grapevine, Texas. But this was no up-and-coming ministry. More than 180 people attended that first service, and every week the numbers continued to grow. Within a year, the couple had purchased a permanent building to house their ever-growing flock. By 2003, the congregation had swelled into the thousands, surpassing the 2,000 weekly attendees needed to be officially classified as a megachurch. In November of 2010, Gateway Church opened a $60 million, 64-acre church campus in Southlake. It came complete with a 4,000-seat auditorium, which was just 25% of Gateway's 16,000 weekly attendees. More than a decade had passed since Cindy's SA had come to light, and while Robert was thriving, she was barely surviving. Throughout all that time, she had been attending counseling in the hopes of coming to terms with what had been done to her by not only a close family friend, but a pastor. According to an interview Cindy gave to the Wartburg Watch in 2024, it was only when she was 35 years old and watched an episode of Oprah that she realized what she had experienced was grooming. She said, quote, "I couldn't understand why Oprah called it abuse. I said, he's not being mean, he wasn't aggressive. He was very playful or, seductive, I guess. That's the word Oprah used," end quote. That episode made Cindy realize that not all SA comes with violence. Much of it, if not most, is far more insidious. It's built on coercion, manipulation, and the calculated misuse of trust and power. Up until that point, Cindy hadn't had any communication with Robert, but after watching the Oprah episode in 2005, she hired an attorney to file a civil lawsuit against him. In her filing, Cindy stated she was still experiencing extreme emotional distress and ongoing mental anguish as a result of Robert's actions. Robert's attorney argued that Cindy had brought the assault on herself by being flirtatious, saying, quote, "It was your client who initiated inappropriate behavior by coming into my client's bedroom and getting in bed with him," end quote. They also accused her of seeking $2 million so she could get rich off Robert's success. In fact, Cindy had asked for $50,000 to pay for her ongoing counseling and mental health needs. Robert's lawyers responded with an offer for $25,000, but only if she signed a non-disclosure agreement. Cindy refused. While this was going on, Robert carried on with his charmed life. From the stage, he preached the prosperity gospel as he urged his followers to give 10% of everything they had, even if they couldn't afford it. He regularly told his congregation that he didn't need the money, but he would be disappointed that they didn't receive God's blessings and would become Satan's prey if they didn't give it to him. According to him, he was just the guy tasked with doing the collecting on his God's behalf. He also told them they were arrogant if they didn't tithe.
Be carefully, because I'm going to say something very strong. Any person that doesn't tithe is arrogant. Because you believe you can make it your way and not doing it God's way. And you have to be arrogant to steal from God. And you have to be arrogant to steal from God. You have to be extremely arrogant to steal from God. And please understand, if you don't tithe, that's an open door to demons. Because that's exactly what the enemy does. He's a thief. And you're allowing God. You're allowing Satan to get you to be a thief, but not only a thief, but stealing from God. And I don't say that to make you feel condemned or to argue about tithing. I'm telling you, that's an open door, and no matter how many doors you close in your life, if you're not a tither, you've always got an open door to the enemy.
Robert and Debbie Morris certainly had a taste for the finer things in life, and the money had to come from somewhere. They lived with their 3 children in multiple million-dollar mansions. While many in his congregation couldn't afford their own home, Robert and Debbie owned 3 mansions at the same time. One mansion was a 370-acre ranch in Jacksboro, Texas, which came with a price tag of $8 million. The property has 5 lakes, several boat docks, and a $1 million fence. As for the house itself, the 4,400 square foot condo features an in-ground pool, barn, and a grand main home. The couple also owned a custom-built $8 million mansion in Colleyville. They also own a $1.7 million holiday home on a peninsula in Possum Kingdom Lake that came complete with a boat dock and heavily wooded surroundings to ensure their privacy. Then there was the nearly $4 million home in Westlake, a Dallas suburb named the most affluent community in the country by Forbes in 2011. Robert also made money publishing an extensive catalog of religious books. He built a following with titles that promise spiritual insight and practical guidance. One of his most well-known works, The Blessed Life, teaches the principles of generosity, tithing, and financial stewardship as keys to living under God's favor. Others, like From Dream to Destiny and The God I Never Knew, explore finding purpose and cultivating a personal relationship with the Holy Spirit, which is key to evangelical teachings. Robert also used his books to rewrite the story of his journey from drug dealer to faithful pastor. In From Dream to Destiny, he shared that he had stepped down from ministry when he was 25 years old, as he needed to do some work on his inflated ego. He wrote that when he asked his God what he should do to correct his pride, he was told, "Well, here's a thought. You could step out of the ministry and just take a regular job." But as Robert, Debbie, and Cindy Clemishire and her family knew, this was a blatant lie. Robert had been told to step down after Jerry rang the head pastor at Shady Grove for essaying his 12-year-old daughter. Robert also expanded his income streams using religious education. In 2009, he followed a path well-worn by other megachurch leaders and launched a university under Gateway's umbrella. Rather than building an institution from scratch, he partnered with the King's University, which is a California seminary founded by Jack Hayford. Their campus in Southlake operated as one of several satellite locations for the school, which offered degree programs in theology, ministry, and Christian leadership. The college was largely staffed by Gateway's employees, and most of the paying students came directly from Robert's congregation. Yearly tuition cost between $25,000 and $34,000, depending on whether students lived on or off campus. By 2014, the Southlake location had taken on far greater importance, and it became the King's University's main campus and administrative hub. The shift increased enrollments, which gave the college the funds needed to expand its programs. The move also meant that Robert could add University Chancellor to his resume. But Robert's crowning glory was his televangelist ministry, Worship and the Word with Robert Morris. The show was broadcast on the airwaves and through TV screens in nearly 7,000 cities. While viewership numbers aren't shared publicly, it's estimated his weekly reach was equivalent to those of Joel Osteen, T.D. Jakes, and Joyce Meyer. With great exposure came even greater influence. In 2016, Robert achieved what he might have considered the pinnacle of his career when Donald Trump appointed him to the Evangelical Executive Advisory Board during his first presidential campaign. The role placed him among a select group of high-profile pastors tasked with advising Trump and rallying evangelical support. His influence was visible again in June of 2020 when Trump visited Gateway Church's Dallas campus for a discussion called the Roundtable on Transition to Greatness. At the event, Trump publicly thanked Robert and praised the church's hospitality. The partnership was beneficial for Trump as he gained credibility among conservative Christians, while Robert cemented his image as a pastor with national political reach. Robert also used his TV and high-profile connections to cultivate deep ties with the Daystar television network. If that name sounds familiar, it's because we did a 3-episode miniseries on Daystar and its many scandals. Gateway regularly collaborated with Daystar to televise conferences and events which extended Robert's reach to a global audience.
How important is it for us to have a grateful heart in what we have and not get caught up in this comparison game of what, well, they have this, they must be more blessed than me. You know, all of these little lies that get stuck in our head about what God has for us individually.
Especially with social media. Comparisons.
And it's even one of God's top 10. Is that you're not supposed to covet what your neighbor has. And what that does is our neighbor's got a new house, we need a new house. They got a new car, we need a new car. And it causes you not to be content with what God has given you. And here, think about this. When you buy something that you don't have the money for, you are literally saying to God, I am not content with your provision for me, and I'm going to do it on my own. And I think God, in his love, says, okay, great, do it on your own. Just go ahead. Now, he's not doing that to hurt us or even punish us, because Jesus took our punishment, but he wants us to come to the place to say, you know what, I don't want to do it on my own anymore. I'd like to do it your way. And then he can line things up. He's a God of order. He's not a God of confusion. The whole universe, when Satan fell to the earth, it became a place of confusion. God comes in and immediately puts things in order. And when he puts things in order and we put things in order, then the blessing can come.
That's right.
You know, one of the things you say in your book is you'll never fulfill the destiny that God has for you if you don't get your finances in order. That's a pretty big statement right there, because we just think, we know people in ministry that just, God's called me, and then they just, but they take no thought of how they're going to do it or the finances that are considered.
And Jesus, again, he said, you know, who would start to build something without counting the cost? That's Jesus himself saying that. And then you've got 16.
And even use the analogy of a tower, because, you know, we're in TV. So count the cost before you build the tower.
Before the tower, that's it. Now, I'll bet Marcus might have seen that. You know,
Totally.
But even 16 out of 38 parables have to do with money and possessions. This is Jesus. So almost half of his sermons, think about if you went to a church, and almost half the pastor's sermons, he talked about money and possessions. You wouldn't want to go to Jesus' church. But why would he do that? It's because he knows that that is such a stronghold that once we can get that area under control, we can get the rest of the areas under control. And it's so many times we even talk about stewarding our time, our energy, our physical bodies, all those things, and those need to be stewarded. But I've seen those just fall into order when people get their finances in order, because where your treasure is,
Yes.
there your heart will
Yes.
be. Not is, it will be. It'll follow it. So it's so important to get our treasure in line, because then it does the work in our hearts.
Through Daystar's platform, Gateway was able to broadcast their conferences into millions of homes, and Robert was able to connect with other major names in charismatic and prosperity gospel circles. By the early 2020s, Gateway's enterprises had reached new heights. The church had 9 campuses, 8 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and 1 in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This allowed Gateway to have over 30,000 worshipers each week through 29 weekend services. By 2023, Gateway's weekly attendance was nearing 26,000 people, which made it the 9th largest church in the U.S. Behind the scenes, the church employed 750 full-time staff to run their main venues, the college, and a worship ministry which produced Christian music albums. In November of 2024, church elders addressed the congregation to announce that 19% of the church's revenue went directly to global missions, which would be about $19 million based on their annual revenue of around $100 million. However, a former Gateway pastor claimed that during his time at the church never spent more than $3 million a year on missions. One day, while still employed at Gateway, that pastor had noticed $1.5 million had been transferred out of the Global Missions Fund. When he questioned Robert where the $1.5 million went, he was asked to resign. Robert and Gateway Church have never disclosed how much he was paid during his time as pastor. While he would have made some money from his book catalog, that doesn't explain the level of wealth he enjoyed at the peak of his church career. Besides a salary and benefits from Gateway, Robert also received between $200,000 to $350,000 a year from the Robert Morris Evangelistic Association he had established in the early days of his career. According to tax filings, Robert worked 15 hours a week at the association, which amounts to a wage of up to $269 per hour. Things were going well for Robert financially, politically, and in terms of his public influence right up until June 14th of 2024, when once again his carefully curated image began to unravel. That was the day the Wartburg Watch posted an interview with Cindy in which she detailed publicly for the first time the abuse she had endured at his hands as a child. Robert immediately went on the defense. He downplayed his actions, blamed the victim, and framed his abuse as a mere moral failure rather than the calculated exploitation that it was. Robert released a statement that read, quote, "When I was in my early 20s, I was involved in an inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady in a home where I was staying. It was kissing and petting and not intercourse, but it was wrong. This behavior happened on several occasions over the next few years." End quote. He failed to specify that his victim was 12 years old, or that it happened more than 100 times, or that it only stopped because she said something, not because he decided it was wrong. He also didn't mention that he was married, spent his days preaching about abstinence and morality, or that he was using his position as a trusted guest in the family's home to gain repeated access to their daughter. Less than a week after Cindy's story was posted online, the Board of Elders at Gateway Church announced they had accepted Robert's resignation. They also agreed to conduct a review of Cindy's story to ensure that they, quote-unquote, have a complete understanding of the events. But they also stated, quote, "Robert has been forthright about a moral failure he had over 35 years ago when he was in his 20s and prior to him starting at Gateway Church. He has shared publicly from the pulpit the proper biblical steps he took in this lengthy restoration process. Since the resolution of the 35-year-old matter, there have been no other moral failures. Pastor Robert has walked in purity and he has placed accountability measures and people in his life. The matter has been properly disclosed to church leadership." End quote. Although they claim that Robert had no other moral failures in the 35 years since he had abused Cindy, that story doesn't exactly align with his own sermons on the matter. In a 2014 sermon, he shared that he was very sexually immoral as a teenager. He didn't take responsibility for this immorality. Instead, he said there was a curse on him which made behaving in this way easy. He said, quote, "I learned to lie and manipulate. I looked for the girls that would be the most susceptible," end quote. Using possession and demons to excuse his actions is nothing new for Robert. He has long preached about spiritual warfare and often framed moral failings or harmful behavior as the result of demonic influence rather than personal responsibility. He even claimed that Gateway Church had an on-site deliverance team, which was essentially a group trained and ready to perform demon removal sessions at a moment's notice for anyone who was so-called possessed. Robert also offered a warning to the women in his congregation when he said, quote, "The very thing that the world tells you to give to a man before marriage to keep him will be the very thing that will cause you to lose him." End quote. He said he preyed on women who didn't have a good relationship with their father or who were insecure, reiterating that it was the woman's fault he chose to prey on them. He went on to say that girls were made to be held by men, and if that wasn't being done by their father, then he was more than willing to step in and do it for them. He then referred to a verse in the Bible where a man and a woman loved each other, but the man R-worded her, which made him hate her because she disgusted him now that she was impure. If she had laid with him willingly, he would have respected her. Robert went on to declare that any form of premarital sex requires lying, manipulation, and deception. And to top it all off, he referred to multiple affairs he had during his marriage which he and Debbie had to deal with. Referring to essaying a 12-year-old as an affair is a whole new level of low and doesn't sound like a person who never had another moral failing. And we also don't know if Cindy is Robert's only victim. It was this warped, holier-than-thou attitude, alongside Robert's deflection of responsibility and declarations that women existed for men's pleasure and were worthless once they'd been used, that finally drove Cindy to come forward with her story in 2024. By then, she had carried the trauma for decades. She had become convinced that the way the church handled it in the 1980s had effectively silenced her. But watching Robert continue to enjoy immense influence through his books, conferences, and his role as a political advisor, without ever fully acknowledging the truth or the damage he caused, was more than she could bear. She wanted to set the record straight and to challenge the narrative that described the abuse as a quote-unquote moral failure with a young lady, when in reality it was the repeated essay of a 12-year-old child. When the Board of Elders announced Robert's resignation, they also shared that 4 of their own members had been put on temporary leaves of absence. One of those members was Robert's own son, James. Within weeks, James and his wife, Bridget, announced they were seeking supporters to help them establish their own church. Cindy responded to the announcement by saying, quote, "Though I am grateful that he is no longer a pastor at Gateway, I am disappointed that the Board of Elders allowed him to resign. He should have been terminated." End quote. Because Robert had been allowed to resign rather than being terminated from his position, he claimed he was entitled to a generous retirement package from Gateway. This retirement package included a payment of $800,000 per year until age 70 and $600,000 per year after that for life. But the church hit back, saying that their official retirement policy capped payouts at $170,000 per year. More importantly, the policy also included a misconduct clause which specified that if a pastor's actions caused reputational or financial harm to the church, retirement benefits could be reduced or revoked entirely. In response to this dispute, Robert filed a legal claim demanding what he felt he was owed as the church's founder and senior pastor. He insisted that his agreement with the elders was binding and that Gateway was obligated to honor the original, much larger payout. He pushed for the matter to be heard through religious arbitration, which is a process that would keep the proceedings out of public view, but Gateway's attorneys argued it should go through the civil court system. While the legal process got underway, and less than a month after Cindy came forward, CBS revealed that Gateway had settled 2 SA lawsuits in the months leading up to her revelations. One related to children, and the other to an employee, though neither involved Robert. It was clear that Gateway Church had a culture problem, and Cindy's experience was one of several involving senior church officials, abuse, and cover-ups. But the history of SA and cover-ups wasn't just a problem at Gateway. In August of 2024, the Houston branch of Gateway, which is led by Robert's son-in-law, announced they were changing their name to Newland Church. He said, quote, "I believe that during this season, as a church, that God is once again calling us into something new, and I simply want to follow." End quote. In November of 2024, Gateway Church announced in an internal memo that tithes were down 35 to 40%. The memo stated, "As a result, we really need to go and start looking at the ministry itself and looking into some staff reductions." When news of Cindy's abuse came to light, senior officials from megachurches who had once shared a close affiliation with Gateway distanced themselves from Robert. They all conveniently claimed to have no knowledge of his actions. But during an investigation, it was discovered many had known about the abuse for more than 18 years. One of those who knew was Brady Boyd, who had been a senior pastor at Gateway Church. He and Robert had been very close. Ironically, Brady made the move to New Life Church of Colorado Springs, Colorado, after their previous pastor's sex and drug scandal with a male sex worker came to light. That was Pastor Ted Haggard. If that name sounds familiar, it's because we've also done a documentary on his scandals a few years ago. Now pay attention to this timeline. The board at New Life Church dismissed Ted Haggard in November of 2006. In 2007, with Ted gone, New Life Church announced they were on the hunt for a new pastor, and it appeared as if Brady Boyd was going to get the position. Karen Black is the sister of Cindy Clemishire, and she was a member of New Life Church at the time this all went down. When she found out Brady Boyd may become the pastor, she came forward to tell the New Life board about Robert's actions and Brady's knowledge of them. After what happened with Ted Haggard, she didn't want their church to be put through another huge scandal, a scandal that had caused everyone a lot of pain and embarrassment. Karen was very clear with the New Life board that Cindy had only been 12 years old at the time the abuse started, and that it had continued until Cindy put a stop to it. Despite the entire New Life Church board knowing this and being made aware of the level of influence Robert Morris had over Brady Boyd, they not only selected him as their new head pastor, but also allowed Brady to make Robert an overseer of New Life Church. Court documents released in 2025 during Robert's fight to claim his retirement benefits shed more light on just how many senior figures at Gateway and New Life knew about the SA and how lightly they treated it. One of those corrupt board members of New Life Church who allowed all this to happen was Jimmy Evans of Daystar notoriety. Even Robert Morris's idol, James Robison, was caught in a lie when he claimed not to know about what Robert had done. Along with others, they viewed the matter not as an ongoing concern, but as something Robert had dealt with decades earlier. Despite the seriousness of Cindy's allegations, the church leadership accepted the narrative that Robert had spent the better part of 20 years repenting for what they called his sin, and that those overseeing his so-called restoration were satisfied he had done enough to make amends. In their own words, quote, Robert's ministry and the integrity of his life over these last 20 years only confirms that his repentance made 20 years ago was real, end quote. The New Life board spoke to the elders at Gateway Church who confirmed Robert had SA'd a 12-year-old child, but that they believed he had been restored. The documents also revealed an anonymous email that had been sent to the church in 2011, warning that a media outlet was preparing to expose the abuse. According to the Roy's report, the email was addressed to not only Robert, but New Life pastors Brady Boyd and other New Life pastors, and all the elders at Gateway and more. The email's subject line read, News Release, Pastor Robert Morris of Gateway Church in Dallas molests 12-year-old girl, and included Cindy's name, her parents' name, and accurate details of her abuse. Rather than investigate, Gateway responded by threatening legal action over what they called false and misleading information. Another file contained a prepared statement Robert could give if the story broke. His PR team was working overtime. In the prepared statement, Robert downplayed the abuse by specifying that Cindy was 2 weeks from her 13th birthday, as though that made the situation less severe. Even more disturbingly, the draft suggested that Cindy was the one who had gotten into bed with him, painting her as some kind of temptress, or as the church likes to call it, a Jezebel. Yet again, Robert was more than comfortable shifting the blame onto the child he had abused. Yet when the news broke about Robert's crimes, all the church leaders who played a large part in the cover-up clutched their pearls in horror. Jimmy Evans said in a statement that he was shocked and devastated by Cindy's recent revelations of the abuse. Brady Boyd also put on a show for his congregation and pretended it was the first time he had ever heard of it. He even praised Cindy for coming forward, as if this was her first time doing so. This video is of Brady addressing his congregation 7 days after the news of Cindy's SA broke and only 5 days after Robert Morris resigned.
You know, I've been your pastor now almost 17 years, and I'm grateful for that. I was thinking about how honored I am, how thankful I am for the longevity of being here with you. And with that comes relationships and trust, and hope that's reciprocal. I love you, I trust you, I hope that's Likewise, this week's been a hard week for me on a personal level because of what's happening at the church that I once was a pastor at Gateway Church in Dallas-Fort Worth. And I want you to just kind of keep in prayers this week. First of all, pray for the very courageous woman, Cindy, who came forward with new information and that led to the resignation of the pastor there. I know that pray for her. We want her to continue to heal and be made whole because of what happened, but also pray for a church that's really, being gutted right now.
That video was later scrutinized after those court documents were released in 2025 showing Brady and several others knew about the abuse since 2007. Brady knew he was in trouble and tried to backpedal, as you'll later see in this next video. For time's sake, I won't play the entire 18-minute clip, but you can find it in our sources below. However, it's important to note that in the beginning of his statement, which was made in June of 2025, Brady spent over 3 minutes talking about how it had been a hard week for him because his wife had to go to the emergency room, and then he spoke of another person close to him who had to have surgery. These were clear manipulation tactics meant to make his congregation feel sympathy for him before launching into his talking points of what he knew of Cindy's abuse. And even then, he lied again when he acted as if he didn't know the details of Robert's crimes.
And then on Friday, an article came out, this investigative journalist, and I want to share this with you today. An article came out on Friday and made some really ugly accusations about me that kind of went national. And as your pastor, I want you to know something about me. When I stand here in front of you every Sunday, everything I tell you is the truth. I will never, ever tell something that's slanted or untrue. I'll never be manipulative toward you. I'll never tell you a half-truth. 18 years ago, I was on staff at a church in Dallas-Fort Worth called Gateway Church. And the senior pastor there was Robert Morris. Robert and I met when I was the senior pastor of a little church out in Hereford, Texas. We had about 75 people in my little church, and for whatever reason, Robert agreed to come out and speak at my little church in West Texas, and I met him for the first time there at a K-Bob's restaurant, and over a chicken fried steak, he asked me to come with him to Southlake, Texas, and help him plant the church in Southlake, and Pam and I prayed about it for a year. And finally, the Lord spoke to us that we were to go to Southlake, and so I showed up at Southlake and helped plant Gateway Church in the first year of its existence. When I came to Gateway, it was 100 people. 6.5 years later, it was about 15,000. It grew really fast, and unbelievable, miraculous growth. I was a part of all that. And during that time, Robert and I were great friends. He hired me. I worked alongside him, had no reason to believe that he had any kind of character issues. He did confide in me that he had had a moral failure when he was 20 years old. And that's really all the details that he shared. It was like 15 years before they had gone through a restoration process. And I didn't have any reason to doubt that. I never saw anything in his life that would lead me to believe that he was not a man of character. Or I would not have worked for him. I would not have put my family under his spiritual guidance if I had not known he was a man of character. Well, it came to light a year ago. In fact, next Sunday will be the 1-year anniversary of this news. But a year ago, next week, it came to light that Robert Morris had sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl for 4 straight years. And it was shocking. It was mind-numbing. It was awful. It was evil. And he admitted to a 4-year relationship that started when he was 20 years old. The girl, Cindy Clemishires, was 12 years old when the abuse started, and it happened for 4 years until he was 24 and she was 16. I didn't know that. Nobody, very few people knew that. The problem is that when I was interviewed here 18 years ago, there was an amazing group of people, I think 5 men, 4 women, a 9-person search committee that did a worldwide search for the next senior pastor of New Life Church. And they were amazing people, great people. They did due diligence on me. Some of the questions they asked me, I've never been asked before, but you can understand they needed to make sure that if they were going to put another person in a position of leadership at New Life, that person needed to be vetted well. And so they asked me every question they could about every topic. And I answered every question honestly. I introduced them to my friends, my pastoral friends, one of which, of course, was Robert Morris. And they prayed, they heard the Lord, and that's why I became senior pastor at New Life Church. In the process, though, of them interviewing me, the search committee was brought, the fact that Cindy Clemishire was 12 years old, that was brought to their attention. They found out, they heard in an interview with a family member that Cindy was 12 years old. And they immediately called the elders at Gateway Church and told them. And the elders of Gateway Church said, we're aware of that. It's been handled. Her family, her pastor has given Robert a thumbs up. They've gone through a process of restoration, and there's nothing left to do. It's already been reported. But the search committee didn't tell me. And so I made Robert an overseer of the church. And I want to say something to you this morning. Knowing what I know now, I absolutely regret that. And I'm sorry that I ever gave confidence to a person that had an obvious evil thing happening in his life. I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry that first of all, I did not know, but I would never, ever put a known pedophile in a place of authority in this church. Never would I ever do that to you, ever.
And while his congregation applauded him, it wasn't enough to save him. The New Life Church board asked Brady Boyd to resign, which he did. Despite the media coverage of Cindy's revelations, many believed Robert would never face criminal charges because the statute of limitations had long since expired. However, on March 12th of 2025, an Oklahoma grand jury indicted him on 5 felony counts of lewd or indecent acts with a child. According to the statement announcing the charges, the statute of limitations was not applicable in this case because Morris was not a resident or inhabitant of Oklahoma at any time. Each charge carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. 5 days later, on March 17th, Robert Morris surrendered in Osage County, posted a $50,000 bond, and walked free within minutes. In response to the charges, Cindy stated, quote, "After almost 43 years, the law has finally caught up with Robert Morris for the horrific crimes he committed against me as a child. Now it's time for the legal system to hold him accountable. My family and I are deeply grateful to the authorities who have worked tirelessly to make this day possible and remain hopeful that justice will ultimately prevail." End quote. Then, on October 2nd of 2025, Robert Morris took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 5 felony counts of lewd or indecent acts with a child. He was given a 10-year sentence but will only have to serve 6 months in an Oklahoma jail. Then he gets to go home as a registered sex offender and will have to pay $250,000 in restitution. Cindy sat in the courtroom surrounded by her family as Robert was handed down his sentence. She had waited for justice for decades. Then it was time for her victim impact statement, in which Cindy faced Robert and told him that his abuse rippled into every part of her life, straining relationships, damaging her marriages, and affecting the way she raised her children. She said she prayed that God helped him to understand the depth of the pain he inflicted. Cindy said, quote, "Let me be clear. There is no such thing as consent from a 12-year-old child. We were never in an inappropriate relationship. I was not a young lady, but a child. You committed a crime against me." End quote. Throughout her entire statement, Robert never looked at her or showed her any acknowledgement. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Cindy's 82-year-old father silently cried as she spoke. Her sister Karen Black also testified, sharing how the abuse shattered every member of their family, the grief compounded by decades of watching Robert rise to fame. Karen faced Robert as she said, quote, "You pretended to be holy, preaching from big pulpits. As you hid behind your facade, we've known you are nothing but a predator." End quote. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, he turned to his wife Debbie and their children and said, "Love y'all." And then Brady Boyd started a new church in Colorado Springs called Psalm 68 Ministries, which, at the time of this recording, he currently runs out of his home. His new website reads, "After pastoring faithfully at New Life Church for almost 2 decades, our calling to serve widows, orphans, and the forgotten, as well as ministry leaders, remains alive and active. He and his wife Pam are asking for donations so they can do missionary work with children.
Former New Life Church pastor Brady Boyd and his wife have started a new ministry. It's called Psalm 68 Ministries, and it operates out of their home in Colorado Springs. Boyd stepped down from his position at New Life Church in Colorado Springs last month after church elders asked him to resign. In making the announcement, the elders said they did not believe Boyd when he said he did not know a former pastor he worked with sexually abused a child.
The empire Robert built still stands, even if the man at the top is no longer leading it. For years, Robert Morris sold himself as God's favorite CEO. Now the world knows what was hidden behind the branding. The pursuit of fame and fortune mattered far more to him than righteousness ever did. This has been the scandalous rise and fall of Pastor Robert Morris and Gateway Church.
I woke up, opened my eyes and looked out to the darkening skies. The world has gone crazy as blood fills the streets. Steal, kill, destroy, the cycle repeats. But we cannot give in to these destructive forces that many digest like a meal with 5 courses. Like wild running horses, we flee from the truth and drink up the lies as we confuse our youth. Oh, but don't lose heart and don't you dare let go. There's always hope in tomorrow, and we make a way by working to save our today. You may not understand, but know there's a promised land. And the day may be dark, but yet still we must fight. Let shadows bow down to the light.